11 of League's Next World Champion. Pretty good name for a show about LCK, right, Loco? Do you like that name? League's Next World Champion?
Damn.
It's pretty harsh, isn't it? Just letting all the Westerners know, this basically whoever comes out of LCK is going to win anyway, right?
Probably.
Yes, okay. So I've skipped ahead of things anyway. Obviously, I'm the usual host, Thorin. Everyone knows Emily's my usual co-host, because sometimes we can't get a guest. It's just me and Emily, sadly. It's a bit sad, but here's the thing. We make it work anyway. And that just essentially allows Emily to completely run wild with her idiosyncrasies and not be held back by the constraints of a normal conversation at all. So some people like those episodes.
It was just me rambling about KT for like an hour. It was good.
The only thing is, you might hear in Emily's voice, she's not exactly the most forceful spoken person anyway. She's fairly soft spoken, but today she's a bit extra soft spoken. That's why she's drinking some warm drink. She's got a bit of a sore throat. I do realise if you see her Twitter name and it says League of Emily, you'd think, fucking, that's a bit presumptuous. That's like that scene in the fucking prequels where he's like, I am the Senate. You're like, this is the League of Emily. That's what it is. But no, believe it or not, that's all just for show. She's not actually that arrogant. So that's obviously, I balance out the relationship that way. Look, you've got to have, a light in the dark. So our guest for this episode is the original Korean, the first Korean we all knew about in the West. It's Locodoco. You're like the first Jedi or something, Loco. The first one we ever knew.
I'm the first Sith. I'm definitely more evil.
You think you're a Sith? You think, well, at times you've gone over to the dark side, Loco, but I feel like there's still good inside you. It's just up to us to try and bring it back, I know you've got that. I know you're actually. Here's the thing, Emily. This might shock you, right? Everyone panned those recent Star Wars movies and was like even Star Wars fans like Dora, who literally will watch any old shit, were like, these movies weren't good. Loco actually low-key likes them, and the reason why is because he told me this is because he actually does like Kylo Ren and he sort of relates to him or something. Isn't it true, Loco?
So I do love Kylo Ren, and I love Kylo Ren as a character, but I hated The Last Jedi.
Okay,
I thought
fair
it was
enough.
Such a bad movie.
Okay.
I'm a huge Star Wars fan also. I watched pretty much every Star Wars movie, comics, Star Wars, Clone Wars animation series, expanded universe. Like I read the books, I know all the retcons, like all that. They just destroy so much of like what they were building up to, and like all the rules that they set for like Jedis and Sith in that movie.
Yes.
So I do not like Last Jedi. But yes, I am very Kylo Ren.
See, I like the way that's actually a real thing. You thought I was joking when I said it. I mean, like I was just riffing on him. It's real. He told me that, right? Okay. So this is the episode, Local, where in the playoffs, we're basically down to the final. So we've got to review the match before, which was decided who was going to play KingZone. And that was between KT and Afreeca, teams that obviously have been second and third most of the split anyway. And people knew it was basically going to come down to these teams. In the end, I mean, it's not really a spoiler. People know by now. Afreeca did win. We will get number 1 and number 2 play in the final when KingZone play Afreeca. And so we'll preview that as well. But let's start here, okay? So just give me your expectations. Because going into this match, I actually didn't hear many people who thought KT was going to win it, actually. I think most people I had talked to, at least, thought Afreeca would win the series. Did you think KT was going to be more competitive than they were? Did you think they could win this series?
So I'll just be completely honest. I didn't watch that much LCK, and when you told me we're going to do the show, I went and watched the matches. So I'll give you my general image of KT and Afreeca, like before I thought about watching this series. Like KT is a very standard, like Korean powerhouse, very strong carry, very strong players. I knew they were like swapping out Ucal and Pawn. I didn't realize like Ucal was like the main guy now, and then I knew about like Rush and Score. So I thought KT would be more like standard powerhouse, and Afreeca, like I didn't think they'd be that good, and I was surprised. Like they were one of the teams in the semis. They're always known to be a bit tricky, a little bit more curveball, southpaw kind of team, and yeah, those are my expectations going into the series. I would probably say like just off of name value, I thought KT would win the series, but a lot of my knowledge, at least for this series, beforehand was very just off of general knowledge, more so than like watching a lot of LCK for this split.
Okay, but let me ask you this then. So people might remember sometime last year, I think it was actually in the spring last year, so it was about a year ago, we did that Thorin versus Loco episode where we argued about who would be number one in LCK. Would it be KT Rolster? Would it be SK Telecom? Obviously, at that time, it was actually SK Telecom. Now, in that scenario, that was the same KT Rolster lineup, except, as you mentioned, they now have actually made like the hard swap and Pawn is out and Ucal is in. So obviously, the old lineup, part of the reason you argued against them, despite the fact some of them are very good players and very historically good players, is there was some sort of a flaw with that old 5-man lineup. So what have you thought of Ucal in the games you've seen of him? Like, do you think it's an improvement?
So, I saw this like interview from Smeb where he said Ucal's as good as Faker and Pawn, or Faker and Rookie. So I had very high expectations because KT is a premier organization in Korea and they're expected to do really well. And they spent hella money to get this roster together. So if they're replacing Pawn, like I'd imagine this Ucal guy to be really great. Just from watching this series, he was pretty unimpressive. He was average and like pulling his weight, but he wasn't like anything special. And I guess like being average and being able to pull your weight and LCK semis would make you a really good player, but he wasn't like something spectacular that he was hyped up to be.
Okay. So Emily, when we saw the match before, like to give people a quick rundown, Rush basically didn't play for KT the whole season because obviously they have Score, who most people still say is the best jungler in the world. But at the very end of the season, they put Rush in their last games, which actually were against Afreeca. But the standings were already decided. We already knew Afreeca was number 2, KT was number 3. So people wondered, in the playoffs, will they actually play Rush? And it turned out they did. They played him against SK Telecom in the first couple of games. Then they took him back out again. Score came in at the end of the series. Right, they played him again here. They took the gamble again. What did you think, Emily, of using Rush, and how do you think they're using him in contrast to Score? Like, there has to be a reason to put him in, right?
Yeah. So I actually, I thought it was interesting that the Freecs ended up starting Spirit, because the Rush Spirit matchup is actually quite good for Rush. When we talk about Afreeca and kind of why they're such a good team now. I know it's been a while since we've talked about them, but one really important thing that happened with this lineup is that Marin left. And obviously, it's not that Marin is a bad player, but in terms of having Marin, Spirit, and Kramer all on the same team, it was an incredible strain on the team's resources because those are all like very resource-hungry players. And with Spirit specifically, it's just that he really likes to farm up and then be able to team fight. Which ties into what Afreeca want to do, but you also need to give him time to do that. So I thought it was really interesting that we got the Rush Spirit matchup from the get-go. And I think in that game 1, KT definitely were able to get the jump on Afreeca because Rush could invade and they had pushing lanes, which is something that we've talked about with KT and trying to balance like Rush versus Score. Obviously, Score had a phenomenal series against SKT, and I think where you saw Rush struggle in that SKT game 1, where, you know, they didn't really have the correct vision set up, and he didn't really come online until about like 12 minutes. We saw him he was able to be a lot more proactive, so it was obvious that they got a little bit more practice in with him, and I thought that it was actually a good matchup for Rush for that reason. Not that Spirit is a bad jungler, but just that Rush's invade heavy style really hampers what Spirit wants to do, which is farm up and team fight with his team.
Okay. Can I touch on a little bit on the Rush versus Score thing? So watching the whole series overall and just knowing Rush and Score, it seems like the other 4 players around KT are so used to playing around Score. And their overall style is so control-based, so objective-based, so late game-based, so just like very team fight-oriented, very objective-focused, like just very, very standard, where Rush brings in a little bit of risk and a little bit of like a Joker style, where he's very aggressive early, he takes a lot of risk, and he gets a huge lead. Like watching the first few games of Rush playing Olaf, one thing I recognize is like, this team has Olaf and Talia, and they got Olaf massively ahead, and they're not diving side lanes with Olaf and Talia. Like, this team is not used to like being ahead early and snowballing that lead, and it felt really, really weird. And I kind of wonder, like, if you're gonna put in Rush you need to switch up the style a lot more as KT. And I definitely think like they had a way to win the series and bring like actually use Rush. I felt like they didn't use him that well. How do you feel about like the whole like Rush getting leads and not like the team not doing anything with it really?
I think game 1 was fine. I think you saw that more in game 2. And I think a lot of it is just like, again, to go back to the SKT game, because I think that's where you saw the most cracks between Rush and the rest of the team, especially in terms of vision setup. I don't think KT was especially prepared, I guess, to support Rush. Whereas you look at a team like KingZone, for example, with Peanut, they work really well with Peanut in terms of what Peanut wants to do, especially in this meta. It's just like really strong meta for him. And I feel like they set up a lot better. So if you're looking at like what the like end game for KT would be, I'd say they should probably take a look at some of the things that KingZone does early for Peanut. But in terms of game 1, I thought they were fine. Game 2 is really where you saw more of that disconnect, especially when Mowgli came in for Afreeca, and they prioritized more pushing lanes in draft. Yeah. Afreeca did, not KT. That's when you saw like KT weren't able to kind of contend with that, especially since where Spirit is more of like a farming and team fighting jungler, Mowgli is a little bit more aggressive early, and that's kind of what we've seen from the team consistently throughout the split, is that they really try to support pushing forward with Mowgli, whereas with Spirit they'll kind of wait for him to farm up and then get into these really huge engages with Kuro and Tusin initiating.
I'll say one last thing and we can go on to the next thing. I do agree game 1 was fine, but it wasn't well played. It was fine because they were ahead and they just set up for objectives, but there's a certain thing you're missing out on. Like if you have Talia and Olaf and you're ahead and you're not diving a bot lane, like you're not making use of why you're picking those champions. If you're going to pick Olaf and Talia, get ahead early and snowball when you're in the position to. It was fine. They set up for objectives and they just scaled. But if you're going to play that style, then Olaf and Talia gets negated so much, like what they're strong at and like the whole reason for picking these champions. And
welcome to KT all year. Drafting stuff and then misplaying their win condition.
I will say one more thing regarding Score not playing. This would have never ever happened with Easyhoon as head coach. So Easyhoon, the previous KT head coach, throughout the entirety of like Score being on KT, which he's been on KT what, like 6-7 years
by
now?
the way, Loco, you might
want to explain the joke so people understand it.
No, he was actually saying Lee Ji Hoon, right?
Yeah.
It sounded when you said it, Loco, like you said Easy Hoon, the mid laner. So I'm just correcting people, like you did mean a different person.
It's okay,
it's a famous StarCraft
I thought he was making a joke.
No, he just said it very quickly, you know, like Koreans do. Yeah.
Okay, Easyhoon is the head coach for KT, not the Azir playing SKT like sub mid laner. Easyhoon is the head coach for KT. He's been the head coach for KT ever since StarCraft 1. He's been head coach for about 15 years now. And Score's been on KT for about 6 or 7 years now, maybe 5. I don't know the exact timing. But anytime Easyhoon talked about Score, he said like extremely, extremely nice things. Score was the only KT player left over from their like big rebuild, and also like he's been on record saying like Score is gonna retire on KT, like we support him greatly, like he's the core of KT, like he's the face of KT, he is KT. So Easyhoon's KT was very based around Score, and I think the whole team was like very much based around Score. And now with Easyhoon, the head coach, out of picture, I think that's why they were more willing to take in Rush, and I think more and more so they are gonna play Rush a lot more. And they're gonna see while Score is good, it makes KT very, very one-dimensional, and I think they do need someone like Rush in the jungle, someone much more proactive, someone that is willing to take risks, to really like enable KT and to take them to the next level. Because while Score is really good, he is probably the best in like the control type jungle. There's certain weaknesses that comes with just being so control heavy as a jungler.
Well, plus, actually, this split, one of the things about KT has been is they've had really good laners and they've had like some early game advantages in leads. It's just that if the two ways you can go with that. If you can't close it out, you've either got to focus on how to close out, or my logic with putting Russian for a few games is go the other way. Just try and win even harder early, and then you don't have to worry about closing out at all. I think that's probably what they were trying to test out, because as you're saying, if you have score, traditionally, that's not really the sort of game you're going to play. He's going to play like a team jungler, he's not going to pop off and get all the kills. So, okay, what about this then? Because I normally myself don't focus that much on the draft and the pick ban, but this Afreeca setup in game 2, it's fucking wild. Like, they played Malphite in the top lane, Loco, and Vel'Koz in the mid lane. What do you think of this?
So, the way that Afreeca preps for these series is there's a reason why Afreeca preps this way for series, and there's you need to know the history behind a few things to know why they do this, and I'll try to explain.
Yeah.
So there's something called Pro League and StarCraft 1. Oh God, I hope I'm not too Last Shadow right here. Going back to StarCraft and all that, but I do want to explain some of the context.
No, talk about I Love Uv, please.
Okay.
More people need to know about him because he is amazing.
So in Pro League and StarCraft, how it works is there are certain maps that are there are 3 races in StarCraft: Terran, Zerg, and Protoss. And there are certain matchups. So Terran is really strong against Zerg, Zerg is really strong against Protoss, and Protoss is strong against Terran. And there are certain maps where it's really bad for Zerg, and it's really bad for Terran, and it's really bad for Protoss. So you design strategies, and Pro League is so much about coming up with a certain strategy for that map and a certain strategy for that matchup, and sniping people out, where League prep in general is just we practice a lot. We're really good at playing standard. We're really good at playing meta. Where StarCraft, it's all about innovation. Everyone's already very, very good at playing standard, and it's more about innovation. And for League also, because it's a team-based game, more so than individual innovation, the teamwork of things are more important, and that's why teams put a lot of time into that. But for StarCraft, it was all about these unique strategies, unique build orders, and playing certain players on certain maps. And that's how Afreeca prepped for this series. They had certain strategies prepared to run. If they pick this, we're going to do this. If you lose this, we're going to do this. If these 2 champions are open, we're going to pick them like this. They had these strategies prepared, and they practiced this. And it's not gimmicky. It's just... It might seem gimmicky to most League users, but this was something very, very normal in StarCraft. And their head coach, I Love Uv, is one of the best StarCraft players, and he's very infamous for doing this for his time when he was a player. And then he had a player after him called Fantasy, also a Terran player, and he forced a lot of this on him, and he taught him how to prep this way. And Fantasy had a lot of the prepping well for matches and prepping well for maps and prepping well for best of 5 series that I Love Uv had, and now Afreeca has. So I think a lot of it can be attributed to their head coach for them prepping this way for this series, and just in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think then, Emily? Because I haven't seen any Malphite played top lane in fucking years. What's this pick being brought out for? It
was played into Camille in the LPL. That's where I saw it. I believe it was also played, when I was looking at the stats, it was also played in Europe. And unfortunately, I did miss that match. But it has been picked as a lane counter to Camille previously. And that is what they prepped it for here. Because obviously they do save that last red side counter pick for Keen in the top lane. And when we talk about Afreeca going back to last year when I Love Uv took over this team, the game 1 Afreeca became kind of a blessing and a curse because they could pretty much only prepare for one game before the team would kind of fall apart because it wasn't they weren't flexible enough to carry out some of the things they prepared correctly, or they just could only focus on one thing as a team, and then they couldn't adjust from game to game. And so Keen, let me
interject.
Yeah, go for it
quickly. I can also explain this part. So, I Love Uv had a long ass interview where he talked about how he hates League of Legends players, and so
it was good. Yeah, okay. It was a good interview.
he talked about how League players are like lazy, they don't appreciate the game as much, they're not as dedicated, and they don't like work as hard, and that's why he really loved Marin for like how much he worked. And then he also talked about prepping in a League game versus prepping in a StarCraft game. He'll be like, okay, so if you want to do this bunker rush, I need to make sure we bring 3 SCVs, and if 1 SCV dies on the way, then I need to make sure we bring in 2 more as soon as I know the first SCV is dying or this bunker rush isn't going to work, and I can try every single permutation of this in a 1v1 setting. And he's like, we try to do the same thing for League, but it actually didn't work that well for League, because League, you don't practice internally. Like, you don't have practice partner. You practice versus other teams, and they can leak strategies, and they don't really fucking care about you practicing what you want, and they ban out this weird stuff that you play and practice if it's bothering their practice. So I think last year, they had a lot of problems with implementing the style that I Love Uv wanted, and that's probably why the whole Game 1 meme happened. And then I think he adapted really well to how League of Legends practice works. He probably has practice partners with maybe lower tier LCK teams, or he asks LCK teams, hey, can we practice in this way? And they allow them to. And he probably learned a lot about like drafting in between games and just working with League players. I just really wanted to add that in because I think it was really relevant to what you were saying.
I think another thing that you have to look at with this Afreeca team, and I believe he said it he hinted at it in that interview, but it wasn't really until this year that we saw it kind of work out. Sorry, my neighbor's dog is barking. It's that he came up with the whole secondary team, and a lot of people really criticized him for it heavily last year because they were like, this is why players are leaving, because we can't have sister teams anymore, and they can go play elsewhere. They don't have to sit on the bench and be part of a practice team. And so he was, I believe, heavily criticized for this when he tried to start implementing it last year. But this year, we really saw they've had that secondary team the entire time. We have seen him sub. We've seen the Mowgli Spirit sub previously before he left. Of course. Yeah, aiming for Kramer, and so I think that's another thing that's really helped out their practice is that this year, despite the fact that I know he really appreciated Marin and he praised Marin a lot, I do think, and obviously Keen is not Marin. He doesn't draw the same amount of pressure. He's not as good of an individual player. I don't think that's up for debate. I really don't. But I do think what Keen does bring, just because he is a younger player with less experience, is a surprising amount of flexibility. So while he will not draw as much pressure topside, we have seen him hop on, say, the top lane Rise, or in this case, the Malphite, and he's been more than willing to go back and forth between tanks and carries, depending on what kind of composition the team wants to run. And I think that has been incredibly valuable for Afreeca, especially since we've also seen Kuro branch out a bit this past split. And I think that can also be attributed to the fact that they have a larger roster. They can play around with a lot of things. And also Keen is not as resource heavy in the top lane. And so you can have different, you can have Kuro actually playing things that aren't just like standard wave clear, be super efficient, we're not going to give you any gold kind of mid lane champions. And so that has also opened up this ability for Afreeca to prepare for their opponents. So while I think a lot of people kind of look at the series and their key takeaway was Yasuo, I'm like, whoa, what a weird, wacky pick, Yasuo, and everyone joking around about solo queue, etc. And we can get into the Yasuo pick later, but I do think the fact that this team obviously prepped it. They prepped the Malphite as the Camille counter pick, and Malphite also just really goes hand in hand with what Afreeca want to do, with having at least 2 primary initiators with Tusin, and then it's usually Kuro. In this case, it was Keen, with the whole team kind of collapsing and descending on their opponents. So something we've seen them do all year. And excuse me, the top lane Malphite pick also just really worked well, not only as a lane counter, but in terms of what the team prefers to do as a unit. I thought it fit really well.
So touching on the Malphite Camille stuff.
Yeah.
So I've never seen this matchup played before, and I was like, holy shit, this matchup fucking destroys Camille and what she wants to do. So what Camille wants to do is early game, she's very, very good at setting up kills. Like her E and her E flash is really good to set up kills for jungle because it's a CC and sometimes it can be really undodgeable too. E flash is very, very fast. And later on, you want to split push and you want to kill the other guy. So Malphite 1 is pretty hard to kill in lane, and the Malphite was actually beating Camille in lane. I'd imagine Smep to be the better player than Keen, and if Smep is losing Camille to Malphite with a better jungler early game like Olaf, then the matchup should be really, really bad for Camille. And even later on, the Malphite's pushing out Camille in a side lane, so there's really not much Camille can do. If she can't beat the other guy in a side lane, if she can't set up ganks on the champion, then she just gets negated completely. She just becomes the worst champion. The Malphite is able to beat her in split push, join up for team fight faster. Even if Camille joins team fight with the Malphite is just a much, much more useful champion in a team fight. I thought it was an amazing pick, and I'm actually kind of embarrassed that I didn't know about the pick, and there's just overall setup for that draft was so good. I was so surprised to see him pick Rakan without Xayah. I was like, damn, I don't know how I feel about this pick, this Rakan into it, but when I looked at the whole comp overall and I thought about it again, like Malphite Skarner with Rakan and various Vel'Koz, it was very, very cohesive draft, and they knew exactly what they wanted to do.
Yeah, I think if I remember, the casters were pretty iffy on that too. They're like, I don't know about this, but I think that also has not only did it just fit in general with what they want to do. We've seen Tusin on the Rakan consistently, both with and without Xayah, all split, and it ties in super. So not only has Tusin just been phenomenal this year,
he's so good,
definitely career year, but the initiations that he's able to set up, especially when they have another primary initiator like a Malphite, is just insane, and it's something we've seen them do with they love to run the Galio mid Rakan as well with the same combo. Yeah, with the same result.
Galio Rakan, Galio Camille, just disgusting champions together. I do want to talk a little bit about Tusin and Kramer. So
let's do it.
I was blown away by how good those two were. I had no idea. As I said, I didn't watch LCK that much this season, and just watching the series, I'm like, damn, Kramer and Tusin are actually so fucking good. Especially Tusin. This guy's engages are so clean, so on point, so instant, no hesitation. The engage he did on Azir and Olaf in mid lane, the flash WR, it was just so instant, and there was a very, very small window where they were going to be open to the engage, and he took it right away, and people just followed up on him. I was just really amazed by how good he was. And Kramer was also pretty good. From watching Kramer before, I just remember them being very, very resource heavy and not that great of a player, but he stepped it up. Also, his build on Varus is so fucking bad. I don't know why he does this. Rageblade into Infinity Edge. It's just bad. Infinity Edge as an item is not gold efficient by itself. It's gold efficient when you have other crit items with it. And when you go straight from Rageblade to Infinity Edge, the only crit you have is Infinity Edge. So I was very confused on why he's building it, and I was criticizing it the entire time I was reviewing the VODs. But other than that, Tusin and Kramer, props, holy shit. I missed out on a lot by not watching the split. It seems
Emily, do you think, since this is the game where actually KT didn't get a single kill and it was basically the cleanest game for Afreeca, but if you look at the KT side of the draft and you don't look at the Afreeca side, this looks like the dream draft for them. It's pretty much all the champions they play and play out of choice and their best champions pretty much. So does some of this tie into what Loco was explaining before about the concept of preparing specifically to try and snipe an opponent's strength? Do you think basically Afreeca sort of let them draft those things and then had this prepared as a direct counter?
I think they were definitely prepared for the Camille at the very least, because they pretty much, the way that this draft went, it was kind of if they pick Camille, we're definitely picking the Malphite. And you also saw Afreeca target the bot lane very heavily in this ban phase. So it was kind of left it up for Deft to pretty much only go on the Ezreal, which I've talked about KT and how they actually like to focus on having a pushing bot lane. But the thing that has frustrated me all split, and I continue to harp on them for this, is that they don't always play around it well. And they don't always focus in-game what they do in draft. So even if it's a very strong draft, they won't necessarily play it out in the way that you would consider correct in-game. And that's been a very frustrating thing about KT across the split, because it's something that it's like, if you could just figure this out, if you could just, you know, not do this here, like they would be such a phenomenal team. And it's very frustrating. No, that's pretty much, I mean, it's not anything I haven't said on this show before about their draft.
KT with Rush reminds me a lot with Immortals with Dardoch.
Okay.
Like, early lead, junglers are able to build, but they're not able to play around the early lead. Like, it drives me crazy that they pick Olaf, and Olaf, both times Rush played Olaf, he was able to 3-buff the enemy jungler.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if it was Mowgli, it didn't matter if it was Spirit, and they don't snowball it at all. Like, God, why are you like prioritizing Olaf so highly, getting a lead and not doing anything with it? If you're able to 3-buff the other jungle, like, you should be able to just run over the game. Like, you should be diving bottom or diving top or constantly forcing fights. But it seems like KT's goal is like, they have an idea of what state they want to reach in mid game or late game, and everything is just going towards like reaching that state and winning from that, like getting Deft to certain items, getting Ucal to certain items. It's really frustrating to watch. And also, for now that we're talking about game 2, I'm not sure if you guys caught this or if the casters talked about it. Afreeca was they were just getting smashed early game by how Rush was playing, and then Mowgli did something like incredibly smart. There was a very, very small timing where he could make a bottom play, but he wasn't level 6 yet. And to get level 6, he would have to take the blue buff. And if he took the blue buff, then the tempo of things wouldn't work out. So he went to blue, and there was a ward there. I'm not sure if he saw it before. He cleared the ward, and that allowed him to hit level 6. And then they made a bottom play off of that, and the game snowballed off it. I thought that was incredibly smart for him to have the game sense and just the sensibility to be like, oh, I need level 6, but I'm at like 99% XP. If I kill this ward, then I can hit level 6, and then we have this small timing to bottom dive, and they actually pulled it off.
Okay. So actually, a question I had is, so Ucal, in what we've seen of him, because he's someone where they didn't play him actually for most of the split locally. They sort of started bringing him in partway through, and it's only at the end of the split they made the hard choice, like, right, Pawn's just out for good, and then this guy's in. And one of the things about a lot of the games he played early is he didn't play like a massive amount of champions. Like, he basically played Azir every time it was available. That was his best champion. And then he played a bit of Talia, and in this series he basically only played Talia most of the time, and then like one game of Azir or something. Right, what do you think about the mid lane matchup here? Because obviously, traditionally, Kuro's never been hyped as like, you know, some monster mid laner. Famously, obviously, he was very bad against Faker. But in this series, I mean, he's playing all sorts of stuff. Obviously, I said they had the Vel'Koz in game 2. Game 4, he brings out this ridiculous Yasuo pick. What did you think about the mid lane in this series?
Mid lane is usually one of the most important matchups in a professional game. It wasn't that important in this game. It was good that Kuro was able to be flexible and play a lot of these different champions, and it enabled Afreeca to do this. But it wasn't like he was the world's best Karma. It wasn't like he was the world's best Vel'Koz, and he didn't really need to be. He just needed to play those champions to the level it was required to. And as for Ucal, he was also like just very average. And honestly, it was really frustrating for me to watch him play Talia, because with Talia, they played Talia Shen in game 3 and 4, and everything about Talia Shen is get a lead in mid lane, and then die bottom with Talia, Shen, and the jungler and the bot lane. You can have 5 people bot lane before they can react. That's the strength of Talia Shen in that draft. Whenever you pick Talia and Shen together, your whole goal is to get bot lane ahead. Just dive bottom with Talia ult and Shen ulting the support or the jungler. They never did it. So it's hard for me to judge him because I know it's not his fault that KT isn't doing that. KT overall as a team probably has a different idea on how they should play it out. I don't have enough information to like really judge this guy, but back to the original question, what I think about the mid lane matchup, I thought it was pretty it wasn't exciting in either direction.
Okay, what do you think, Emily?
I think it's funny because Ucal, prior to debuting, so he's been with the team since last year as a trainee because he was underage, and then he turned 17, I believe, this past January. So it did take a while for them to, I think, ingratiate him. I assume just based on the prep they've done that he was scrimming with the team already and kind of rotating between him and Pawn. But I think it's funny because Talia is actually the champion that he's known for playing in solo queue. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think the thing with Ucal and the reason why I've praised him is that he gives them such a better jungle mid 2v2 regardless of whether they're playing score or rush, and especially when they're playing rush, like there's no way this team could have played rush with Pawn just because he never had mid priority. So I think in that regard, that's why I am like high on Ucal, because I think a lot of his mistakes he can learn if the team is willing to grow around him. My main issue with KT and the way they play goes, I think, outside of laning matchups. So I'm just going to go into this because we haven't really touched upon it yet. There is a microcosm for both of these teams, and it happens in game 3 at like 27 minutes, and it's the infamous, I know people are tweeting about it, but it's the infamous Cloud Drake trade where KT decide that they're going to fight over Cloud Drake, but then they get caught out of position and Afreeca just goes and storms mid, and so KT gets the Drake and they come back to defend their mid turret, and Tusin, like, he has a very there's again a very small window for which he can do this, and he just goes in on Alistar, and everything just falls apart for KT in that 1 second. Like they win the game off of that. And I think that's such a microcosm for KT because they have such good players. They've shown that with Rush and Ucal, they can kind of morph and transform into a different team if they're willing to do so. And it gives them a lot more flexibility. However, my main issue with this team remains the same. They fight when they don't have to, or they don't fight when they can. And it was awesome to see Afreeca know when they can fight. And I think that's something that this team has been consistently strong at throughout the split, is with their initiators, whether it's Tusin and Kuro or Tusin and Keen, or even at sometimes Tusin and either Spirit or Mowgli, but it's typically the mid or top with Tusin, is that they know exactly when they can go in. And that's something that KT could learn, because they come mid and late game, they are not good at identifying when they should fight, and it costs them games. And in this series, I think even more than the prep, even more than the individual laning matchups, even more than their draft, which can be heavily criticized and was, I think the main difference is that KT still gets too aggressive when they don't need to be, and they fight around objectives that they don't need to take, or they don't take advantage, as Loco pointed out, of an early game lead that they could snowball so much harder. And that's the most frustrating thing about KT roster for me.
So for KT, how I look at them and how I see them understanding the game, and also in general, this is something maybe not a lot of viewers know. Coaches in Korea have a lot of say, a lot of say, more so than coaches in North America or Europe. And there's also, like, as we saw with I Love Uva and Afreeca, like the team is very like I Love Uva style now. Mm-hmm. in certain, like in NA, a lot of times, like, so let's say I coach 3 teams. All 3 teams should have certain similarities because I'm the coach of that team in terms of maybe how they play their macro or maybe how they draft. And that's not the case in NA. A lot of times, like, it doesn't matter who's coaching the team. Players will have bigger say, and that team will be more player focused, and it'll be more dependent on, oh, this player has, or this team has double lift, and this team will play in a certain style because they have double lift. And in Korea, while there is definitely some of that, if you have certain players, that team will be very, very shifted towards that style. For example, Marin, if your team has Marin, your team will probably be very, very top lane focused. Marin's going to have a huge voice on the team. He's going to have a huge say on how he wants the team to play, how he wants the team to draft. For KT, I actually don't think this is a lot of Mata or Smeb or any of them, actually. I think this comes a lot from coaching staff, KT overall as a team, coaching staff, and Score. Score is someone that's been always very safe and very standard, even when he did play AD. And their understanding of the game is, we pick stronger backline, we get to the point where our stronger backline has 3 items or 4 items, and then we're going to take team fights. Everything before that should just lead us into getting our backline to get these items. And they play exactly like that. And they don't account for stuff like, if early game snowballs too hard, it won't matter if you have a stronger backline. If we give up too much dragons early, it won't matter that our champions are innately stronger. Like certain amount of infernos and certain amount of gold lead makes it that they're just going to be able to run us over, even in a straight up team fight. If they have too much engages, we can't get skill to that point. Like, they're just so set in how they think the game should be played and what they think is strong. They're just trying to do that over and over again and just getting demolished by these teams that don't allow them to do that. I think that's why KT has always, like, traditionally been weak in playoff series and, like, important series, because in important series there is, like, stuff that you can't account for, like players going off that you had no idea would go off like this, like Faker just, like, going off, or when they play versus Rock's Tigers, like Peanut doing something really unexpected, or Prey having, like, a super game, or, like, Khan just running them over. Like, KT is so vulnerable to things outside of their imagination or things outside of the norm that they're not prepping for. And they beat teams really handedly that can't handle their standard game style and their standard, like, skill to this point. But Afreeca wasn't one of those teams. And I think it's a huge flaw in how KT coaches and how Score likes to play.
Okay. So as you referenced when you alluded to it before, Emily, that in the last game, Kuro picked Yasuo. And this is not a champion that we're seeing played much. And obviously, he himself hasn't played it for years and years. We have to go way back to basically, like, GE Tigers when it was a meta pick, actually. I mean, in fact, actually, funnily enough, obviously Loco knows all about summer 2015 in Yasuo. Shout out to the TSM CLG match, right? Classic throwback there. So here's the question, though. In this particular match, is this also just a one-off weird pick that he had planned for this matchup or something? Because, like, theory craft me, what can a Yasuo mid actually do in Season 8?
Mm-hmm. So here's things Yasuo's good at. Yasuo's a good split pusher. He's a good team fighter, and he can dive backlines really well. Things he's weak at. Versus certain mid lane matchups, he's really weak. He gets pushed out. He's not able to farm. He can't 2v2. He's also an AD champion, so you need to get AP damage somewhere else. Yasuo overall, as a pick, the only reason I think they took it there, I'm not too sure on this. I'm not too sure on the Talia Yasuo matchup. The only reason I can imagine that they would pick Yasuo there is Yasuo's good into Talia in lane, and they wanted something that could have pressure in lane. That's the only reason I could imagine. Maybe they wanted it for 1-3-1 later, but there's better champions that they could have taken if they wanted it purely for the 1-3-1. It was a really odd pick, in my opinion. What do you think, Emily?
Do you have any info on that, Emily?
I think so. I definitely don't think it would have been. I was actually looking for the exact fight. It was at like 10 minutes at Dragon. That's basically when they get the Yasuo ahead. And even then, you did see. So it's funny because I feel like you look at the record of this series and you think, wow, that wasn't even close. And while it's true that Afreeca did prepare very well, I actually thought, given the way both teams played, most of the matches, save game 2, after KT didn't snowball their early lead, I think most of the games are actually very, very close, including this one, because KT did end up trying to make picks on the Yasuo with some pretty good vision setups. But anyway, in terms of the Yasuo, what I do think that Afreeca were going for here, if I have to think about the team as a whole, their draft philosophy over the past, longer than a year even, like back to when I Love Oof basically came on the team. Whenever I see Yasuo picked specifically in a composition, I think what they're going for is kind of that 5v5, like, for lack of a better phrase, wombo combo kind of style, where they have the Ornn in the top lane that can help facilitate Yasuo with the knockup. And it isn't like a super knockup heavy comp, but because Tusin he can flash initiate with his ult as Morgana, but he's not going to be providing the same kind of hard CC that you'd see him with a Rakan or with an Alistar. They're looking for the Yasuo Ornn combination, and then they can follow that up with Mowgli and Tusin in a team fight, so that Kramer can just destroy people on Caitlyn the entire time. I won't say that I like it, but I'll say that I don't think it was a one-off. I think they specifically prepared to try it out. And this game 4 isn't a bad time to try it out, because they're picking the lane. They're picking a fairly strong lane. Like KT, whenever they pick Xayah Rakan, they don't always play around it really well in terms of snowballing that laning advantage. So that also might be something that Afreeca took into consideration when preparing this draft. And again, if you mess it up, you still have one more game that you can, fix and adjust. So I think in that regard, it wasn't a bad time to pick it, even though I'm not super sold on it. As after watching this game, especially when we did see that KT were able to get a lot of picks on the Yasuo, even after that 10-minute dragon fight, with having, if they were able to set up their vision correctly. Yeah. So it's definitely not something that I think the team will try against KingZone, for example, because KingZone will immediately punish you for that.
So you kind of mentioned playing Yasuo for the teamfight wombo combo with Ornn. For me, like, that seems really weird. While that is an aspect of Yasuo that's good, there's a lot of things that can wombo with Ornn. Like, even something like an Orianna, like, what is it? When Ornn knocks up, like, just use Oriult. That's not, in my opinion, what makes Yasuo, like, unique as a pick, and, like, why you bring Yasuo. Like, the wind wall aspect, the being able to split push, like, those are the things that are very, very unique to Yasuo, and that's what you pick Yasuo for. So overall, I thought the Yasuo pick was weak. And speaking on, like, KT being able to catch, after the dragon fight, they were out of game. They couldn't win team fight straight up. They couldn't win split push straight up. And they had to do those risky moves to, like, try to pick them, like camp rushes with pinks, be in places they don't expect. They were doing it really well, and Yasuo was dying in so many of the fights. I think he got picked off like 3 to 4 times after winning in that dragon fight. That made me so frustrated to watch KT, because you actually know how to play proactively, and you actually know how to play in a just wait out until we get items way. But you only do it when you feel like you need to do it. If
when
you don't feel,
the corner.
If you feel like you can play this, like, farm up until we get item style, you just choose to do that no matter what, unless, like, you're forced into this situation. So it makes me super frustrated, because it's not like KT isn't capable of being proactive. It's not even Score isn't capable of being proactive. They choose not to. They choose to go for this, like, boring, like, farm up. Like, it's not even good. Like, if they were consistently, like, delivering results, like, I'd be all for this. But League changed so much. League's so much more about like snowball, tempo, being first to objective, forcing team fights. It's not about like scaling to these items. Like, oh god, watching this series, it made me appreciate Afreeca and like what they're bringing to the table, and like them evolving with League of Legends, and like the whole scene getting better and better, and like KT just like sadly getting left behind, even with some of the best players in the world, and it was just sad to watch.
So Loco, a player, because obviously since Afreeca has been one of the top teams in LCK, a player we have discussed on this show many times is Kuro, the mid laner of Afreeca Freecs, because he's someone where if you go way back to when they had that first GE Tigers team, he was quite a flawed player. You know, they were a very good team, but he was kind of like a Victor bot. You know, he had to get that champion. He was kind of questionable on a lot of the other picks. Like at the time, I remember anytime he played Yasuo, it was like, cover your eyes, you know, this could go fucking badly.
Azir.
Yeah,
Azir.
Azir rather. Yeah, that's what I meant actually.
Yes, I meant
Azir actually. Yes.
Oh,
yeah. I was just thinking of Yasuo before. Yeah.
Let me tell you guys like a really cute personal story. So, Prey's parent, Prey talks about a lot of things on his stream and on his YouTube, and so Prey's parents, like they asked, like someone asked him a question, hey Prey, do your parents come to the matches? And the Prey's like, dude, I've been a pro gamer for 5 years, like, and they come to a lot of my matches. Like nowadays, like they talk about League of Legends and they talk about draft. So after we lost to SKT, Prey's dad came up to Nofe, and then they talked a little, and then he came up to Kuro, and then he's like, Kuro, like you're a good player, but don't play Spearbird. And a lot of people
calls Azir.
Yeah, that's what he called Azir. Like he's like, you're good, but don't play Spearbird, buddy. Like Prey's dad's telling Kuro to not play Spearbird.
That's straight fire. Yeah, get his dad on Katie Roaster stuff. Sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
Someone hire Prey's dad,
exactly,
please.
Yeah. He's the secret fucking Phantom Menace behind it all. He's the right. Here's the question I was going to ask though, Loco, is coming from circumstances like that, like that's obviously one of the worst positions to be in as a pro. You're on a team that can be a champion, you know, but everyone from the outside sort of like, you know, you're not really as good as the rest, you know, you're kind of the liability in the team. But ever since then, we think of the years since then, even in Rox Tigers, he does seem to have developed as a player and gotten better. So what do you think of the 2018 Kuro? What do you think of his career path?
I have not seen that many games, so I don't want to be, I guess, too harsh. As a general statement, like just from watching this game, he's gotten better, but he's not special. Like Afreeca isn't good because of Kuro. Rox Tigers wasn't good because of Kuro. Like he's average to above average mid that's consistent and can play a lot of things. Like that is a good player, but that isn't like a special player. Like the special players on, if I pick one special player on Afreeca, it has to be Tusin. Like Kuro's just above average. Like he's just consistent. You need players like this on championship level teams, but he isn't a player that will take your team from being like bad to like championship level. He isn't like a game changer.
Well, I mean, for example, I actually said this today on Twitter. Like my analogy for Kuro is Pobelter, basically. Because
that's actually really good.
Yeah, they're both pretty consistent players. You know, like you say, if you're going to make a championship team, every lane isn't going to carry you. And you're not going to have star players. I mean, Katie Rolster's shown us that doesn't work. So you're going to need some players where that's exactly what you want. The whole thing is, if you have Pobelter, you're like, right, cool, he's going to do okay there. He's going to be above average on certain things. He's going to play a lot of stuff. He's never going to ask to be the star player. Now I can put my star player somewhere else. There we go. I'm starting to get a team going. So yeah, I kind of like your description of him there. Yeah, I'm feeling that. Okay. What do you think, Emily?
I think Kuro is highly valuable, even if he's not like the mid laner who's going to light the world on fire. I think Kuro was one of the only reasons why Afreeca could do what they did last year, because he was so willing to, or I don't know if he was willing or not, but like they basically gave him no golds and he still managed to hold mid. They were basically like, you know, we're going to give all of our resources to Spirit and Kramer and Marin, and you're going to have to hold mid lane. Can you do it? And the answer was, yeah, he pretty much could do it, which I found personally impressive, despite the fact that he obviously, again, you know, is not going to be the most flashy player. This split, I think now that they don't have to have now that they don't have to basically be like, Kuro, you get no resources because these other players need it. I think that's where you have seen them open up and try out some of these new picks for him. So not only the Yasuo, but I think him returning to the LeBlanc was particularly interesting. And you even saw KT ban it in this series. And I think he definitely wouldn't have been able to do that on the previous team. So he will have these games where, you know, he will be allowed to carry. But again, I think his value is in his flexibility and his efficiency. He knows how to hold mid lane, and he is reliable in doing that. And that's what this team needs, especially when they do rely on being able to kind of all come in for a team fight together. Like a lot of that was on Kuro, obviously, when he was playing the Galio earlier, the split. So yeah, that's where I find like Kuro's true value as a mid, and he's remarkably valuable to Afreeca because of their philosophy towards the game.
Well, the funny thing is, when you were describing the last team he was on, the one he was on where obviously Marin was in the team, like what's funny is when you describe it like that, it makes it sound like, you know, he's a bad player because it's like, you know, we're going to give all these other players the gold, but the idea that you could actually still be decent, not just be a mad leak in the mid lane. Like think about that if someone comes and tells you that, yeah, in this team, sorry mate, you know, a lot of the gold's going to go to the top laner. Oh, well, yeah, I guess it is Marion, fair enough. And the AD carry, oh, okay, I guess I'm not getting much then. We're also going to have the jungler farm all the time. Like, fucking, what's this? This is bullshit. What, I don't get any gold. Like, that's pretty hard to play, right? A competitive mid lane in LCK with no resources.
I think I screenshotted last year, like, because he was at the very bottom, I believe, for like gold percentage of his team, and I took just a snapshot of the Afreeca, and I was like, "Have you thanked Kuro yet today?" Because it was insane to as to how much gold they're giving elsewhere when mid is such an important part of how the game is played. Having mid priority is so important.
Okay. Right, Loco. Mm-hmm. Now we are down to brass tacks. We're down to the final. This is it. Whoever wins this is the champion. Now, what's interesting is, obviously, Afreeca, I mean, it goes without saying, this organization has never won an LCK title. They never were really in a position to ever win one, you know. All they used to do in the past was upset SK Telecom, that's it. And then they obviously never could play them in the finals of a LCK, therefore they could never win. Now, they're actually in a final. We're going to get to see all these different players get their experience. But they are playing KingZone DragonX, who have basically been almost unbeatable. Like the series they've lost this year, one of them almost doesn't count because it's when Khan was suspended and they had to use the sub-top laner. Like they have been outrageously dominant. So can you see a world, like can you theorycraft a way Afreeca could win this final?
Honestly, not. Even though I haven't watched that much LCK, the games that I have watched have been KingZone games and they look really dominant, like Prey, Rilla, Peanut, BDD. I also like there's a limitation to how much strategies that you can come up with, and there's a limitation to in a best of 5. It's much weaker to be cheesy, and it's much weaker to win off of certain picks. Like it's very easy for those picks to get cut out and banned. So I find it really grim for Afreeca. I don't think any of their players are better than any of the players on KingZone. Maybe Tusin is better than Gorilla and at being aggressive and playing like Rakan or Alistar. Okay. Like that's like the only aspect where I can see Afreeca's better than KingZone at. So for me personally, I don't see them winning. I can see them maybe taking a game or two early, but I don't see them winning.
Okay. What do you think, Emily?
I agree. I think they'll take a game. I think they can definitely prep well enough to take a game. And it's not like KingZone don't have weaknesses. I do think if you destabilize the bot lane, not because the bot lane is bad, because they're actually so reliant on the bot lane leaving them and kind of just, you know, like Prey and Gorilla, we know you're going to be good. You know, we can just leave you there and focus elsewhere on the map. I do think Afreeca will recognize that and be able to punish that for a single game. But I look at this KingZone team, and not only have they been consistent across multiple metas, the split, but they also are in a meta currently right now is just so good for this team.
Wait, isn't it a lot of tanks top? Wouldn't that make it pretty bad for KingZone with Khan not being the greatest tank player?
I think it's super good for Peanut and the way they like to play around Peanut. And especially because with the eradication of Tracker's Knife, it really opens up what they want to do with Peanut and BDD in the jungle mid 2v2. And I also think it so that basically BDD pushes up and Peanut can just have his run of the enemy jungle. Like you absolutely have to ban Olaf against Peanut, or he will just absolutely destroy you with it. And I also think that the bottom lane, specifically Gorilla and Prey has a remarkable initiation sense, and it's weird, but it sounds kind of off meta. But I think Ashe is still a super strong pick for him specifically. And the way he plays around Vision with Ashe could also help, is another thing that you might see KingZone do in this meta. Because, again, of the eradication of Tracker's Knife, I don't think teams have necessarily figured out how to play without that same kind of Vision safety net. We saw even Afreeca and KT both kind of have issues with this in their series. I just think at this point in time, not only has KingZone just been so consistent across multiple metas, this split, but to what Loco said, they don't have, Afreeca doesn't have consistently better players across the board. Yes. And they also, it's just such a good meta for the jungle mid duo on KingZone that is going to be really hard to destabilize for me. Like, I don't see how, even though they have been playing around Mowgli a little bit more, and he's a bit more aggressive, like in terms of invading his opponents, I still don't see how they stop Peanut and BDD in that jungle mid 2v2.
I mean, right now, like a lot of the stronger mid stuff like Talia and Rides, BDD is excellent at. Like, if KingZone gets Olaf first pick and they pair that up with like Ryze or Talia, like, I don't see any way Afreeca can really deal with that. You can be cheesy, like you can have cute picks, but mid and jungle 2v2 and mid priority are just staple parts of the game that there is no way around it. Like, you need mid priority, like you need to be able to win the 2v2, because winning mid jungle 2v2 basically allows you to open up the map in any direction you want. Enemy jungle, enemy bot lane, enemy top lane, and BDD and Peanut are some of the best players right now at that.
What do you think of the factor that I said before, Loco, where I pointed out that, like, you know, a bunch of the Afreeca players have never been in a final? Like, yes, obviously Kuro and Spirit have, but people like Keen, Tusin, these are not players who've gone deep in playoffs. And, you know, finals is different from playoffs, because for people who don't know, playoffs in LCK is all in the studio still. You're still in that, like, I mean, it's not the OGN studio now, but, you know, you're in that one studio where you play all the normal matches in the regular season. So even though it's the playoffs, and yeah, that's pressure, it's still not the same, right? Do you think that going to a stage setting, if you're basically, it's your first time there, do you think it will affect people?
Definitely, and also it's in Busan. I'm not sure, like, once again, like going back to StarCraft, the biggest like StarCraft final for Pro League was in Busan, and Busan is like a huge city in Korea. It's like, it's probably the second most famous city after Seoul, and a lot of people come out to like Busan matches, and it's also a place people go to, like, just to go to Busan. So
it's got a beach, isn't it, famously? Yeah. So it's like a cool holiday spot.
Yeah, so I think the finals is going to be huge, and I love Woo. He's going to do he actually talks big a lot. Like, in StarCraft, he talked big. In League, he still talks big. So there is probably some pressure on the players, and like the pressure of playing versus KingZone that's been so fucking good, and plus the pressure of like your head coach shit talking, and plus the pressure of playing in Busan, plus, as you said, the pressure of playing in finals for the first time. Like, there's so much pressure on the Afreeca, like, newish players.
Well, actually, if you want a funny piece of trivia, again, from StarCraft about I Love Uv, he actually did an interview after he retired, so like after his prime, when he no longer like had to win all the championship. And he basically said in this interview, like, the times when I was the most cocky and I used to talk the most in interviews was actually the opponents I was the most afraid could beat me. And I was trying to sort of like, psych them out or play mind games and throw them off, because obviously people would think it's the other way. Like, if you're a champion, people would think that you're just kind of like talking shit because you're going to win, but it's funny because he actually was taking the opposite approach, which I don't think many people do actually generally. Most people, if they're worried about the game, they do the opposite, don't they? Because they don't want to make a fool out of themselves, so they downplay it, if anything, I figure. Mm-hmm. So I wonder what he's going to say for this final then.
I mean, he'll probably like address that they're the underdogs, but they're not scared. I don't expect too much out of it. I don't think finals would be that exciting. I expect like very clean KingZone win.
Okay. Right, let's do another prediction then. So I want each of you to pick, who do you think will be the MVP of the final? Because the thing is that, like, one of the details about these two teams that I like is that if you actually look at both of these squads, they might be not only are they like really well-rounded teams, but generally, they have a lot of good players in both teams. It's not, neither team is like, it's just this one player has to go off. Like, they are pretty well-rounded. So there's a lot of ways it could go, right, depending on matchups and what they decide to do. So who would you pick? Who would you plump for? What do you anticipate?
So I think Frey or Rilla is like MVP in the traditional sense that they are the most valuable players and they're going to contribute the most to winning. But Afreeca bot lane is pretty decent, and I do think they will hold up. I think where the game's going to get blown up a lot is going to be top lane or jungle with Khan or Peanut, and they're going to have a lot of kills, and they're going to be the ones carrying the game, and they're going to be the ones getting the MVP award. So I would say Peanut or Khan.
Who do you pick, Emily?
I am going to say I was going to go with the easy answer of Peanut as well, just because I think KingZone,
I mean, if you get a lot of kills as a jungler, you're gonna get the
KingZone are just, again, like we've talked about the flexibility of both of these teams, and KingZone, not only do they have talent in every position, as does Afreeca, I would argue, but they also know in certain metas how to play around like whatever component of their team is the best at any given time, which is what allows them to that's what has allowed them to be so consistent over the past split. And right now, I think they can very easily recognize, and we saw it towards the end of the, especially towards the end of the split when 8.5 hit, is that they know how to play really well around Peanut's jungle pressure because it's such a good time in the meta for him to be playing his signature classic invade heavy style. And in that regard, I think it'll either go to him or it'll probably go to BDD, just because the LCK really likes to look at mid laners, and BDD is, again, just a very consistent core component as to how KingZone really want to play. And because of the current meta, I believe he'll be more visible. Unless, Prey locks in Ashe and then just is destroying people with it, which I know I've been like really bad at predicting what picks will appear, but I think there is a possibility that we could see them pull out the Ashe in this series.
I think there's definitely a possibility for Ashe, but even if you pull out Ashe and you shoot arrows, it's not like
you're not going to get an MVP for that.
Yeah, like
that's true. Prey had that whole video where he was complaining about that because the MVP always went to Smeb. Never mind, Prey's screwed, also, given the way that LCK look at MVPs.
For like mid lane, right? He's gonna play stuff like Talia. He's gonna play stuff like Azir. He's gonna play stuff like maybe not Karma, like Galio and Rise. Like there's just gonna be a lot of wave clear mid from both ends, and like Kuro isn't someone that gets killed over and over again. Like they're both just gonna be like wave clearing. Maybe they move first. Like it's not gonna look like very flashy or like very skillful. I'm telling you, like the kills are gonna happen in top and jungle, and that's where like the MVP is gonna go. Like it's the flashy positions. It's like it's gonna have a lot of kills. It's gonna be a lot of fights.
The funny thing is, though, to tie into what you said before about the fact that for you, like, the traditional MVP is actually praying Gorilla for the way they play as a bot lane and the fact that they are so stable and they're so reliant, like the teams that they've been on, Rocks, Tigers and this team, are reliant on them. But obviously the flashy stuff comes from elsewhere. Well, actually, it hasn't come out yet, but I did another interview with your friend of mine, Lord Flame. And in my interview with Lord Flame, right, as you'd expect, I asked him in the interview, basically, like, you know, when you go to teams like, I mean, I gave the example of his current team, you know, Echo Fox or the Mortals. I said on these teams, okay, since you're a big name, why don't you sort of tell the coach, like, you know, let me carry more, basically. Like, give me more games where I can be the focal point. And what he actually said is, he actually thinks that in general in League of Legends for the last couple of years, you can't really be like an actual pure carry top laner. And I said, okay, but you know, fans are going to think, but what about Khan? What about Huni? And he actually said a point that I think ties into this match right now, which is, he said, the reason why they can be carry tops is because you have to have a really stable bot lane. If your bot lane is super stable and you know they can always get through laning phase and get to the mid game, then you can put the resources in the top lane, and it's still a gamble, but it's not as much of a gamble. But he said if you do that gamble and then your bot lane like falls apart when they haven't had the resources, you basically just fucked. Like, you can't then carry out the top lane and you take over the whole game by yourself. Now, if you look at this team, Khan is the guy who gets all the credit from the fans because they just see the games, you know, where he plays like Riven and goes fucking mental and kills everyone. But the point is, he probably wouldn't be doing that or as successful if he had insert any random mediocre LCK bot lane, right?
I'll say this. If Khan was a better tank player, I'm pretty sure KingZone would play around bot lane a lot more. Just in general, playing around bot lane has so much rewards than playing around top. Just if you get your bot lane ahead, the ability for support to move first and assist jungle and mid is so big. That tempo play of like support being able to recall first and affect mid and jungle it's just such a huge play. And here's the thing about champions in general. So when you run tank top and you run AD carry bottom, AD carries don't function without gold. Like, they're purely number champions. They need to hit certain numbers. They need to hit certain gold thresh points. They need to hit certain item thresh points, and they can start functioning as a champion. When your AD is behind and the enemy top lane is behind, or when the enemy top lane is behind and your AD is ahead, it's so much more favorable. Like, when your top lane is behind and your AD is ahead, you much rather be in that position because top lane, like, you can pick certain champions that are very resource free. Like, currently in the meta, like Cho'Gath, Singed, Ornn, Sion, these champions, even if they were at 0 gold, they would still function and they would still do their jobs. Maybe they won't be as tanky, but they can do their jobs. Like, AD carries, like, without gold cannot function. Like, they don't even function well with one item. They need at least 2 with Infinity Edge and a Zeal item. And to get really strong, they need a third Zeal item. And to break that armor thresh point, they need to start building Last Whisper, or they need to get survivability items. Like, these points of AD are so fucking important to hit. I think the KingZone allows Khan to play topside because Gorilla and Prey are just very flexible players and very flexible also in personalities, and they like letting other people play things and let them like flourish. They're really good teammates in that way, and they can like give. But the superior way is like playing bot side, like just straight up. Unless there's top carries that are like broken good in the meta, such as like when Gangplank is really strong, you want to play around Gangplank, or AD carries can function with one item, like Jhin or Varus meta. But yeah, in general, bot lane style is so much stronger.
Okay, what about this then? Let me ask you this. Afreeca as a team, one of the players who's been actually an MVP candidate is Tusin. And if you look at his champion pool, he does play stuff like the Alistars we mentioned before, things that you can be aggressive on. Then you look at Kramer. Actually, if anything, the thing that people often criticize Kramer about is he thinks he's the star player, basically. He is like quite a high-fee player and he wants to go ham, you know. Is that their chance to win the game? Do they have to like win bot hard, do you think?
As Emily said, like that is definitely the possibility. And I mentioned Tusin's Alistar or his Rakan can be very game breaking, and they can break them in that way. I don't see it really happening. Yeah, honestly, because Gorilla and Prey are so stable. Yeah, I can't imagine it happening. And even if it happens one game, they'll realize, okay, they're fucking playing bot side and they're picking these aggressive champions. We can ban this out, or we can play a little bit more towards bot side and we'll be fine, and they'll make adjustments. Gorilla and Prey, if they are losing, they're not the type to be like, no, we can handle this. We don't need to ban this. Like, just leave us alone. Like, we can handle this. They're not like unreasonable. They're not overly prideful. Like, they're very flexible and they have like a championship mindset. Like, if they need something, they'll ask for it.
For people who don't know, by the way, Loco actually played with Gorilla, and Gorilla was in Najin at the time when Loco played briefly on Najin in like, I think it was like season 3 or something, right?
Well, also, just in general, me and Gorilla talk a lot. Like, he's still one of my closer friends, and I ask him a lot about Lee. We talk about a lot of things in general, and I watch a lot of Prey YouTube, and I talk to Prey. Like, these are, and like, they're just, they've been around for so long, and they just consistently perform. They don't cause problems. Everyone loves playing with them. They're flexible. They're like, what's
Let
to
me
say?
ask you this then. Before we close the episode, I got one question actually about Prey then, since you seem to know a lot about him. He's obviously one of the modern players who you've been around, you've been able to meet at Worlds and stuff. Here's the question I have. So a lot of modern fans won't know this, but Prey was obviously a very good player, basically back when you were still playing Season 2, coming into Season 3. Obviously, that's when Najin won. But what a lot of people don't know is after that year with Najin Sword, where the team went downhill and, you know, Macnoon was kicked out, you know, all these things happened, there was like a whole year where there was no Prey. He was completely out of the team, he was out of the scene. And I remember at the time, there even used to be comments behind the scenes where teams like, obviously a famous example is CJ Entus, where Frost obviously used to have Mad Life, but then they had Space, if you remember. And Space was famous for being like, you know, the most just bland, pointless AD carry ever. He never did anything. So people always used to say behind the scenes, why don't they just get Prey? You know, why not put Prey with Mad Life? And what I always used to get told by insiders in the Korean scene is that Prey's reputation was really bad. Like, people thought, you know, he had like a bad attitude or he didn't want to play or something. So how did this guy sort of go into the wilderness where it looked like, you know, he was never going to get back and then come back and have an even more amazing second half of his career?
There's actually a lot of drama with it. I'll talk about the parts that are at least a little bit public from Prey's YouTube and a little bit public from Facebook. So, Najin is a pet project. Najin, like Shield and Sword, is a pet project by one of the, I remember if like one of the son of like the owner of like the Najin group. Okay?
Right. Which is like some sort of electronics group or something, right?
Yeah, they own shitload of electronics. They have like a giant building in Yongsan, like that's like the main area where Koreans sell electronics, and that's where you go to buy computers and stuff like that. And that's where like Najin Gaming House is. That guy loved Watch, and it was like a pet project. And so, or the overall like Najin organization was a pet project. And as they did badly, this one is like Facebook public, so I don't feel that bad about talking about it. But Prey got a girlfriend, and his girlfriend was there are certain like Korean fans that are like this. When they date players, they're very like show-offy. They're like, I'm dating this player. And then like they look down on other fans like, you're not dating a player, like get fucked, get cucked.
Okay.
She was like very show-offy. Prey would sometimes skip like after team game dinners to go hang out with his girlfriend, and that girl was just like really, really bad for Prey. And that was Prey's first girlfriend, so he really, really liked her. And then his career went down with that. His skills went down with it. He became a little bit more isolated from the team. The Najin, like the head, didn't like Prey, and basically that's why Prey disappeared. And then their relationship ended, and Prey really grinded. And as he really grinded, and as Najin came to an end, the old Najin people like started grouping up. If you remember the original GE Tigers, it's Nofei from Najin, Gorilla from Najin, Prey from Najin, Kuro from Najin, Hojin actually from Najin, and Smep. What is it? He
was from Incredible Miracle.
Yeah, I am.
The rest were Najin, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then but Smep was friends with them through Kuro, who was Kuro also used to be IM. So and then that's how that team formed, and then Prey started doing well. So basically, Prey did shit because he got a girlfriend for the first time, and she was pretty bad for him. And then he started doing well after they broke up, and he started doing well. And that's why like the rumors were bad around Prey, because like player got a girlfriend, doesn't practice that much, doesn't hang out with team that much, and also like the head of the organization started disliking him. So a lot of what's said about him can be controlled. That's why it was pretty bad for Prey.
Okay. Yeah, good story. Right. By the way, normally when we end the episodes, Loco, like the classic Thorin ending is I just cut the VOD. Like everyone's waiting for an outro and I just cut it when someone stops talking. But in your particular case, right, people know, obviously, you're not with the Golden Guardians team anymore. But what I wanted to know is this, okay? Do you have any info for people on what's coming up? Like, do you plan to do more content? Are you going to stream? Are you going to become a coach again? Do you have any info you can give us just as a parting thought?
Sure. I thought all Thorin VODs ended with, what if aliens came down to Earth?
That was how the interviews used to end, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So no aliens this time?
No aliens, just Loco.
Okay.
That's close enough. That's like a Korean alien.
So I don't have any desire or want to coach in the near future. It's pretty against my personality, and it's something that I don't enjoy greatly. I love the competitive aspect of it, but I'm going to stay away from it for a while. I'm streaming every day from noon to about 8 p.m. PST and doing content. There are like things that I'm working on and things in the pipeline that are just not too finished yet to announce or even talk about, but I'm still very involved, or will be very involved in the competitive scene, and I'll be better about pumping out content. It's hard to get back into things.
I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Twch, Sanity, Gman, Kokupsi, Andreas Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, VeXii, Kevin Haupt, Jason A, and Travis G. Greb. Want to suggest a guest to appear on my show or a topic to discuss? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question. In 2018, for the first time in history, you can directly influence and support my content with the Patreon link below. Unlock the code to the streets and join the Scrilluminati today.